Captain's Pick, the FPL Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the 11th episode of Captain's Pick, the FPL Podcast. I'm your host, Geoff at Geoff Willis, and each week I'll be talking fantasy Premier League football. You can find the show on a whole host of podcast services, just search Captain's Pick, and we also feature on the YouTube channel FPL Podcasts, so please remember to subscribe, like and share. A big thank you to everyone who is listening. We've now had over 550 downloads, which is great and serves as a massive motivation to keep working on the pod and try to make it as good as possible. So thanks again for listening. On today's show, I'll be diving into the big hitters and look at who's essential. I'll be looking at game week 9 fixtures and how my squad is shaping up. And I'll also go over transfers and my captain's pick for this weekend. So first of all, and thanks to friend of the show Digby for asking about big hitters and what is the best combination going forward. Now with this, what I thought I would do is try and really see what was meant by big hitters. And I kind of think it's a combination of price and previous season's points tallies. Pretty much filtering into midfielders and attackers, as these are the guys really that can get the double goal hauls, hat tricks, can get those massive points hauls. Obviously you occasionally get them from defenders as well, but over a sustained period, over the whole season, I think it really is midfielders and strikers. So on the transfers page here on the FPL website, first of all looking at midfielders, I've just filtered it by price, and I thought I'd looking at it the top 6 most expensive midfielders. So we've got Salah at 12.8, Hazard at 11.3, Sterling at 11.1, Sanchez at 10, and Mane at 9.9, with De Bruyne at 9.7. I'll go into the strikers in a second. So just looking at these really. Salah, first of all, obviously most expensive player in the game, and obviously if you don't have him, you can spread that cash to a lot of other players in your squad. I currently have Salah. I still think he's a good option, although he's not being quite hitting the same heights as last season, although he's got a good set of fixtures coming up. And I think for me and for many other managers who have Salah, the next 3 or 4 game weeks are crucial to see whether we keep him or not. Obviously had a fantastic season last season, so we can only really go off one season's stats for him. That's why it's a little bit nerve-wracking with him at the moment to see whether it was just a one-season wonder. I still think he'll do decent stuff this season, but whether he'll hit the heights of last season, potentially not. But I still think he could be a very good option. Next up, Hazard, 11.3. Over his FPL career, his seasons go up and down, and it's whether you can pick him in the right season and at the right time. So if we go back to season 13-14, got 202 points, scored 14, 10 assists. Fantastic. And then the season after, 14-15, 233 points, 14 goals and 10 assists. So managed to actually put 2 seasons together there. But then the season after, 15-16, only 5 goals, 4 assists, 104 points. So there's the inconsistency. But then if we go to the next 2 seasons, 16-17, scored 224 points, 16 goals scored, 9 assists. And then last season, 173 points, 12 goals scored, 6 assists. So he's really only had one really dodgy season. His standout seasons being the 16-17 and the 14-15. Looks as though he's possibly going to be matching those seasons. And obviously, if you've got him already, he's had a fantastic start this season. I haven't had him. I've very much been sort of gauging his performance, but he seems to be very consistent. He's now owned by nearly 50% of players in the game. So if you don't have him, he's a real rank killer if you don't. So he's looking at a very good option at the moment. And he's obviously cheaper than Salah, 1.5 million cheaper. So, and doing a lot better at the moment. So currently out of those two, Hazard would be the pick, and looks more essential. Pretty decent fixture run, not quite as good as Liverpool's, but some decent games in there, and he has got the form. What I'll do is I'll keep going through the players, and then at the end I'll do a bit of a roundup of I think who's essential and what combinations might work out. So next up, Sterling at 11.1. Again, it's had a decent start so far to the season, 4 goals, 2 assists. Last season, obviously had his best season so far, 229 points, 18 goals scored, 17 assists. If you can match that again, he's a great pick. You're always going to have some rotation with Pep. Out of the 3 players so far, I would have thought Sterling would be rotated the most. I don't think Hazard will be rotated much at all throughout the season, with Chelsea being in Europa League. If it's kind of a non-void game in the Europa League, he's definitely going to get rested. And so I think he'll play most of the league games. Salah will play league games. Obviously, they have Champions League. So he may have more reduced minutes, but he's such a linchpin to that team. I definitely think he'll be looking to start most of the games. And Man City do have some great attacking options. So I still think Sterling's a good option. Obviously, consistency in terms of seasons, similar to Salah in a sense that they both had amazing seasons last season. Can they do that 2 seasons in a row? We've seen Hazard can. So that would be my thoughts in comparing those two. Sanchez at 10 million, can't really talk too much about him because he's not an option. He's far too expensive. Man United all over the shop. Keep an eye out to see. I mean, he's not even really starting at the moment, so obviously he has got pedigree. So if we look over his previous seasons, 14-15, 16 goals, 8 assists, 207 points. 15-16, 167 points. Goals scored 13, assists 5. 16-17, his best season, 264 points, 24 goals, 11 assists. And even last season, 152 points, 9 scored, 8, 10 assists. Not bad, but he's nowhere near those sort of seasons currently. So it's just far too expensive. He himself and Man United have got to show a hell of a lot more to really even be in this conversation. I wouldn't even classify him as a big hitter. He's only here really just because of his price and what he's done previous, but currently he is not in the big hitter conversation. Next up, Mane. He's had consistent seasons the last 4 seasons he's been in the game. In terms of goals scored, 11, 11, 13 and 10. Assists, 4, 9, 7 and 8. So pretty consistent. I'm not sure I'd qualify him as a big hitter because he's not. I mean, in all of those seasons, he's not reached 200 points, which feels like a little bit of a prerequisite to be called a big hitter. although his price is reflected in that, although as a caveat to that, he did start out at 9.5, I think, or even 9. And he's had massive investment since he had a great start to the season. But I feel like, again, probably doesn't qualify as a big hitter because the same kind of inconsistencies throughout a season seem to bore out, because 4 goals in the first 4 games and then blanks in the last 4 games. So, again, don't quite think he fits in the category. Would need to have a massive season to sort of be in that conversation, I think. But can cover Liverpool attacking returns if you don't want Salah. But out of the two, and of course there is a 3 million price difference, Salah for me is the better option from just a football point of view, but of course FPL you can use those funds elsewhere. And then the last player, De Bruyne, obviously got that injury in game week 2 at 9.7. Potentially coming back this game week. I would have thought maybe subs bench might get the last 10-15 minutes, probably still working on his fitness. Had 3 great seasons, the last 3 seasons, capping it off last season, 209 points, 8 goals, 18 assists. In the last 3 seasons, he's had 49 assists. So it's incredible consistency there. Certainly a big hitter, and at price 9.7, it's only going to go up from now if he starts playing. So keep an eye on him. I mean, if you don't want to risk not having him at this price, then go for it. But I think you've got to at least give him 1 game week just to see if he's playing. If not, 2 or 3 game weeks. So again, I think he comes into the conversation as a big hitter in the next few weeks if he's playing. Because I think if you have a choice, you would pick Hazard over him. You'd pick Sterling over him. Still think you'd probably pick Salah over him currently. We just need to see if he's going to get the minutes. So there's the sort of the midfield big hitters, or well, in terms of a couple of them, non-big hitters, I would say. Hazard, I would say, is the essential big hitter in midfield currently. Depends obviously how your formation is set up, how many big hitting midfielders and forwards you want. I would say Hazard is essential. Salah, depending on the next 2 game weeks, they've got Huddersfield and Cardiff. If he goes big in those games, I think he is essential, although expensive essential. And if you're only looking at having 1 in midfield, Hazard is probably your man. In terms of combination, again, it gets a little bit tricky here, but with the price that De Bruyne is at, and if he does start playing and starts returning points, potentially a Hazard De Bruyne combination could be quite good, I would say. But of course, if you don't have any Liverpool attacking players, they're going to score hatfuls this season. So I feel like you need to have some coverage there. But in terms of the 2 City midfielders, from a big hitter's point of view, I would say Sterling would be rotated more than De Bruyne, and De Bruyne is 1.4 million cheaper currently. So I'll certainly bear that in mind. Going into the forwards, again, I'll do similar to what I did in the midfielders. So most expensive, Harry Kane at 12.5 million. Has had an okay start to the season, to be fair. Scored 5, 1 assist. Obviously, that Cardiff game was a bit of a killer. You're sort of looking really at him to be scoring 2 or 3 goals in that match, especially if you captained him like I did. So that was a disappointment. I've had him since the start of the season. For this set of fixtures, certainly going into the next one, West Ham away, I feel like he can score then. But if you listened to the pod last week, he will be probably exiting my team after this game week in my wild card, where I'll be bringing in Hazard. In terms of form and pedigree, I mean, the last 4 seasons, consistency in terms of goals and point scoring has been unbelievable. So in terms of points, 14-15, 191 points, and then from there 211 points, 224 points, 217 points. In terms of goals, 14-15 was 21 goals, and then seasons after 25, 29, 29. So you've got to think that he's going to be getting up there again. He hasn't looked quite the same in the start of the season, to be fair. But looks an amazing option in terms of his previous seasons. But it's probably, if you haven't got him, certainly wouldn't be looking to get him in. I think it is too expensive. I think there is better options up front and in midfield from a big hitter point of view. But what I would do is look at him over the next 5 game weeks, see how he does. If he starts looking good, starts returning goals in some difficult games, from game week 15 is when I'm looking at bringing him back in if I get rid of him next week. And just look at the sound of these fixtures from game week 15 to game week 27. So it's 12 weeks. Southampton at home, Leicester away, Burnley home, Everton away, Bournemouth home, Wolves at home, Cardiff away, Man United at home, the only top 6 club, if you want to call them that at the moment, that they face. Then Fulham away, Watford home, Newcastle home, Leicester home, Burnley away. That is an incredible amount of fixtures for a top striker. I'm looking at getting him back in for game week 15 and just setting and forgetting about him for those 12 weeks. The caveat to that is, of course, the next 5 games, if he blanks all 5, then that is a major conversation I need to have with myself and with Harry Kane. I can't see that. Of course, it's the sort of form over fixtures, or can fixtures bring on form? Those are the kind of fixtures that would bring on form. And so I think he's a great option from game week 15, certainly, to be looking at. Next up, Aguero, 11.3. Phenomenal striker. Great form so far. Scored 5 with 4 assists. So scored the same amount as Harry Kane, but of course is 1.2 cheaper. In terms of previous season pedigree, I mean, I'll go over the last 6 seasons. In terms of goals, 23, 12, 17, 26, 24, 20, 21. So it's phenomenal consistency from a goals point of view. Will definitely get you points. Is cheaper than Kane. Is cheaper than Salah. Same price as Hazard at the moment. So he's a great option. Looks as though Pep is starting him in every game. So I don't think he's looking to get rested, but he is having reduced minutes, which is a concern, especially when you compare him to Kane, who plays 90 minutes every game. But Aguero, as I said on the pod last week, can do the damage in 60 minutes, and Man City quite often do get early goals and get ahead of teams, and then just kill the game by completely mauling them with goals and not putting the result just out of question that it's a win. So a great option. City have pretty decent fixtures, certainly in home games, and that's when Aguero looks to really do the business home games. The next 3 home games are Burnley, Southampton, Man United, and then the 4th one is Bournemouth at home. So great home fixtures. The away fixtures could be a little bit tricky. Spurs away, Chelsea away. But I think he'll definitely get you returns. He's a great option, and he's owned by 50%. He's a 50% ownership in the game. So again, very similar to Hazard. If you don't have him, he's going to kill your rank if he goes big. So I certainly think, just as a quick note before I forget it, him and Hazard could be the essential combination midfield and attack, certainly when you look at their ownership and if you don't want to get killed by rank each week. Third on the list, Lukaku, 10.9. Feels very expensive. Has been okay so far. Scored 4, so he's only one less than Kane and Aguero. But playing in a sort of a dreadful Man United team at the moment. He's had pretty decent consistency. Last 6 seasons, 17 goals, 15 goals, 10 goals, 18 goals, 25 goals, 16 goals. So he's definitely going to get you returns, but really for that amount of money, only a few points behind Aguero, he needs to be getting a lot more goals and a lot more points. And again, very much like Sanchez, just don't think he's an option at the moment at all, the way Man United are at the moment. Could be a pretty good differential. He's only owned by 7.3% of managers, but I think that's for a reason. But if you were bringing in a second striker, potentially, but I just think the price around that 7 million price range, where you've got Arnautovic and Mitrovic doing just as good as Lukaku, just don't think he's an option. Then we go to Aubameyang. Too expensive. Just too expensive. He's been okay so far, scored 4 goals, 2 assists. Can't really go on last season because he only played half the season. Did well though, scored 10 goals for the amount of time he played. I think he had an injury as well in that time. So, but doesn't fully play the 90 minutes, it looks like, and he's been chucked out a little bit onto the wing. Don't think you can classify him as a big hitter. Far too expensive, especially when you compare him to the other Arsenal forward, who I'll go into in a minute. Just don't think he's a big hitter. Arsenal doing well attacking. If he was priced a couple of million cheaper, for sure, but just don't see him as an option. Then we have Jesus at 10.2. Again, just don't think you can classify him as a big hitter. Decent season last season, but obviously just does pick up injuries. Doesn't look like he's the starter for Man City so far. It's definitely been Aguero. Does come on sort of the last 20 minutes, half an hour, but he's only scored 1 goal so far. So again, far too expensive. Just not an option for me at the moment. Not a big hitter. And then the last one who I'd put in this conversation, Lacazette at 9.7 million. Looks to be the number 1 striker now at Arsenal in a team that does score a lot of goals. Scored 4 goals so far, 4 assists. Had a decent first season last season. Scored 14 goals in a first season. That's not too bad. So he started off well. Arsenal scoring goals for fun at the moment. He seems to have got the nod up front. Started the last 5 games, played 90 minutes in 4 of them, and scored 4 goals in that. So he definitely seems to be in form, and he is that little bit cheaper. Certainly, he's sort of nearly 3 million cheaper than Kane. So I would definitely go Lacazette over Aubameyang. I would say really in the forward lineup, there's only 3 viable big hitters, and that would be Kane, Aguero, and Lacazette. So I would say Aguero is essential, Kane possibly essential from game week 15, and currently Lacazette, he's nearly essential. He's in very good form at the moment, and it just depends on what combination you go for. So really, in summary, I would say if I had a complete choice, and obviously it's a bit hard to know about squad formation and what other players you've got and what money you've got available, but I would certainly say my number 1 pick from midfield essential would be Hazard. Number 1 pick essential from forward lineup, Aguero, and a combination of the 2 is probably affordable. You could then possibly bring in De Bruyne to go alongside that 3. Bit hard when you start bringing in more big hitters after that. I just don't think you can afford it without decimating your team. But I would say depends on the minutes you get from De Bruyne. You could swap him out with Lacazette potentially. So have Lacazette, Aguero, and Hazard. That's in terms of form. I'd say that's probably the 3 picks that are on form at the moment. You could also look at Aguero, Hazard, and Sterling as well. There are combinations there. My own personal combination currently is Aguero, Kane, and Salah. But as I mentioned, Kane will be going out next week for Hazard. And so my combination of big hitters would be Aguero, Hazard, and Salah. The caveat there, of course, if Salah does nothing in the next 2 game weeks and we see minutes and points from De Bruyne, then potentially De Bruyne coming in for Salah. But that would leave me with no Liverpool attacking players, which doesn't feel right. So there would maybe have to be some kind of compromise there where it's Aguero, Hazard, and Mane. Though obviously I know Mane has picked up an injury, but may only be out for 1 game week, I think. So certainly things to consider there. So I hope I've gone into some of the options and combinations and who I think are the essential big hitters. Let me know on Twitter what you think of that little segment. Okay, so going on now to run through the fixtures. What I'll do is I'll go through fixture by fixture and then just let you know who I've got playing in those games. I should mention at this stage as well, I've already made a transfer. I mentioned it on the pod last week that I brought in Doherty and took out Wan-Bissaka. So that's the one transfer I've made at the moment. I'm also looking at bringing in Mitrovic for Zaha, which I'm definitely looking that way because Zaha has now got a yellow flag and is 75% chance of playing in that game. So that's looking very dodgy. Obviously, I'd take a -4 point hit, but if he doesn't play anyways, it's one of those ones that if I take the hit, he'll probably start and score. But I like Mitrovic's fixture, certainly over the next 3 games, and they've got Cardiff away. So I can see him returning, and he's in better form than Zaha, especially if Zaha's carrying a knock. So that's the sort of where I'm looking at transfer-wise, and then looking at game week 10 to be doing my wild card. So the early game is Chelsea-Man United, so that's at 12:30 on Saturday. So make sure you get your team in done by 11:30 Saturday morning. I'll remind you again at the end of the pod. So in this game, I'll have Alonso. I think he could do bits. Definitely, Man United haven't looked great. I'm sure Mourinho will probably come to part the bus. So that could be a clean sheet for Alonso. Could see Alonso maybe getting a free kick in this game because I think Man United could be quite hard to break down. Obviously, hopefully Hazard can do well in that game, but it could be tight if it goes. If we don't score early, it could go. I say we because I support Chelsea. If we don't score early, it could be decided by something like a free kick or a set piece from a corner. So Alonso could be involved there. So I quite fancy him to pick up maybe a clean sheet and an assist or even a goal in that game. I fancy us to maybe win that 1-0, I think. Because just knowing Jose, I think he'll definitely come and he won't want to lose at Stamford Bridge. So that's what I'll be looking at. No other players in that game. Obviously, I haven't got Hazard. If he does well, great. But I'll certainly be looking at bringing him in the week after. Bournemouth at home to Southampton. Could be a few goals in here for Bournemouth. They've looked very good attacking. Southampton haven't looked that great at all. Does depend. Bournemouth, how well they gel after the international breaks. They've got a few yellow flags on a few of their players. So Southampton has come to a few of these games, and I think they won at Palace a few weeks ago. Admittedly, that was without Zaha in that game, so I think Bournemouth are definitely more attacking than that. But yeah, it's slightly a concern that I haven't got really any Bournemouth coverage. I've only got 2 players in this game, and those are 2 bench fodders, so not really worth mentioning. But I think, yeah, Bournemouth will probably nick this one, I think. Maybe a 2-1, I think. Maybe Danny Ings gets a goal in that if you do have him. Then Cardiff at home to Fulham. Of course, this is where I'm looking at bringing in Mitch Fitch. Definitely feels like it's a game that Mitch Fitch could do some damage in. I know he hasn't scored in a few, but they've had some tricky fixtures. He did well during the international break, so I quite fancy him to do something in this match. So yeah, Fulham very attacking. I could see Cardiff scoring though, because Fulham haven't been that great, and Cardiff will see this match as one that they really need to be getting some points from. So could be a bit of a... I can't believe I'm saying this, but it could be a bit of a thriller there. I can see that maybe being 3-2 to Fulham. There we go. Next up, Man City home to Burnley. Burnley haven't been great so far, picking up a bit of form, but anyone going to the Etihad, I think, is going to struggle. Aguero's had the international break off, so I could see him doing good and getting a big points haul there. De Bruyne could be back also. So yeah, I think I don't hold much hope for Burnley there. Could be a 3-0, maybe 2-0, because sometimes after international break takes a little bit to get the kind of the rhythm back. But certainly see City winning that game. Obviously, I only have Aguero playing in that, and I'll mention now he will be my captain's pick. Unless something else crops up, injury or something, or he's definitely not going to start, but I think he'll start. And really looking at captain options, potentially Salah, Huddersfield away, but obviously he's got a yellow flag at the moment, but I think he'll play. I think he'll probably do well in that match, but I like to go with a home fixture. I think Aguero will do well. I think Kane could do bits away at West Ham as well. He's got pretty decent record against them. London derby, sort of anything goes. So I think it's funny. I'm half tempted to captain Kane just to make up for last week, but I think that'd just be bringing emotion into it. Is probably not the best thing in FPL. So Aguero in that match, and he'll be my captain. Newcastle home to Brighton. It'd be interesting. So these are the 2 teams that have got some great fixtures coming up. From both of them, I would look at defensive players. The only maybe attacking person there was potentially Murray for Brighton, although I think he probably does better at home in home fixtures. I could kind of see this being a 0-0. So if you are going to invest in Newcastle and Brighton for these fixtures and play both your maybe defenders, maybe a Yedlin and maybe a Duffy or a Dunk, could be some clean sheets in this game. Yeah, I could see that maybe being 0-0. I don't have any players from them though. West Ham home to Spurs. Fancy a couple of goals in this. I think Spurs have got a couple of their players back. Eriksen's back, I think, and Dembele's back. So I fancy them to do a little bit better from an attacking standpoint. Still missing Vertonghen at the back. So I think if Arnautovic starts, because he's got a bit of a niggly injury, if he starts, I could definitely see him getting a goal. But I think Spurs could win that one 2-1, I think. If West Ham aren't playing particularly well, it could be 3-1. But yeah, I think Spurs, if West Ham play well in that match, could be like a 2-2. But I fancy Spurs maybe just to get that. And again, I've only got Harry Kane. Probably his last game in my squad, certainly for the next 5 fixtures after that. So hoping he can lead the squad, maybe on a brace, which would be nice. Wolves at home to Watford. Obviously, I've brought in Doherty, so looking at clean sheet and attacking returns from him. Had an amazing few games recently. Goals and assists and clean sheets. 3 points hauls, like 12 points, 15 points in the last 4 games. So no doubt I'll put him in my side and he'll get nothing, but he's just looks in great form. So do Wolves. Watford obviously coming from that heavy defeat to Bournemouth at home. So they'll be looking to bounce back, but I fancy Wolves to win that game, hopefully get a clean sheet. Maybe 1-0, 2-0 to Wolves there in that game, I think. I quite fancy him in there. That he's the only player then I have in that match. Then the late game on Saturday, Huddersfield at home to Liverpool. In this game, I've got Salah, who's got a yellow flag, but I think he'll start and I think he'll do well. I also got Trent Alexander-Arnold, who was obviously rested last week, so it's a little bit of a concern. I think Klopp really likes Trent. He's, played him in most of the games so far this season. I think it was a little bit of a tactical decision. But away at Huddersfield, I think he'll definitely be looking to play him. I'm not totally concerned. If he was to get rested in this game, then that would be a huge concern then. Because I just like him at his price point. What I brought him at 5.1, he's still only 5.2. And I, again, fancy him to get an assist or maybe get a free kick, certainly in the next couple of game weeks. So looking at points from him in that game, fancy that to be a 2-0 Liverpool win, I think. Going into Sunday, only one game. Everton at home to Palace. Got Pickford still. Though I fancy, if Zaha doesn't... This is part of the reason why I didn't wildcard, because if Zaha doesn't start, certainly, I can see Everton getting a clean sheet there, remarkably. So I fancy him getting it. Even if Zaha does start, I'd still be I still think he could pick up a clean sheet. It's another reason why I would kind of want to get rid of Zaha. I just don't want him playing against Pickford, especially with a yellow flag now. Just fancy Mitrovic as the better option in that game. So I'd probably I'll only have 2 players playing in that game, and that'll be the Pickford in goal and Richarlison, which I fancy him to do well against Palace. I don't have Wan-Bissaka anymore, so not too bothered if Richarlison goes big in that game. If Zaha doesn't play, I can see that being 2-0 Everton. If Zaha plays, there's a chance of a goal, so maybe 2-1 Everton. I fancy Everton to get some points in that game. And then the Monday night game, last game of the weekend, Arsenal at home to Leicester. 2 players playing in this game. Chilwell played well for England, I thought, during the international break. Can't see him keeping a clean sheet, but was so close to scoring a goal last week. I quite fancy him to get an attack in return against a very leaky Arsenal defence. And similar to Maddison, I think Maddison could definitely get an assist in this game, even perhaps a free kick. I think Vardy could do well up front. He normally does pretty decent against the top 6 and Arsenal in particular. I fancy Leicester, both players, to get some points. Don't think Chilwell get a clean sheet, because I think Arsenal have been decent going forward. More than have been very good going forward. But hopefully Chilwell can get some attacking points if the clean sheet doesn't come through. And definitely looking at Maddison after blanking last week to get some points in that game. But he does have some great fixtures coming up after that. So West Ham at home, Cardiff away, Burnley at home, Brighton away, Watford at home, Fulham away. So not too concerned if he blanks away to Arsenal. He's got good fixtures coming up. So that's the my squad going into game week 9. That's all the fixtures covered. Again, I'll let you know on Twitter if I do bring in Mitrovic for Zaha. I would say it's 95% likely at the moment. So my squad going into it would be Pickford in goal, back line of Doherty, Chilwell, Alonso, and Alexander-Arnold. 3 in midfield, Richarlison, Maddison, and Salah, and up front, Kane, Zaha, and Guerrero as captain. So I'm really happy with the way that team is shaping up, and I think it could look even better in game week 10 once I've wildcarded and made a few little moves. I think I mentioned Zaha just then in that starting lineup. That could be Mitrovic. I think it probably will be. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap up the show there. A reminder again that Game Week 9 deadline is Saturday morning at 11:30 a.m. That's 11:30 Saturday morning. So make sure you get all your changes in before then. You can find me tweeting FPL Gold on the podcast Twitter account at Captain's Pick Pod. Feel free to send in any questions or topics you'd like discussed on the show. And from me, good luck with Game Week 9. And until next time, it's been my pleasure to talk with you.
Captain's Pick, the FPL Podcast.